As a battle over spending unfolds on Capitol Hill, our next guest makes the case in an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal that continuing support of Ukraine is good for the U.S. and helps us with our geopolitical standing with China as well. Senator Tom Cotton of Arkansas joins us. He's a member of the Armed Services Committee, Intelligence Committee, and thanks for joining us. Senator, it's good to see you this morning.
Thanks for having me on, Joe. Appreciate it.
Like so many things nowadays, it's neither party is really monolithic on neither side of the aisle on this. Where do you think the pockets of not wanting to support Ukraine reside more at this point, Senator, on the left or on the right with you? Because I think maybe I've heard more coming from certain Republicans about being very careful about backing Ukraine or spending too much when we don't spend certain things here, even in this country, that their border is more secure than ours.
Well, Joe, we can do two things at once. We can try to stop this war of Russian aggression against Ukraine and Europe to protect our interests there, while also protecting our own border, which Joe Biden was doing both. But that doesn't change the case that it is in America's interests to stop Russia in Ukraine. This is not just to benefit Ukraine. It's not just to benefit Europe. It's to protect our own national security interests. We've seen time and again throughout history when unprovoked naked wars of aggressions go unpunished, it only leads to broader wars. And I, like everyone else, want to see an end to the slaughter in Ukraine. But I think it's important for Americans to understand if we withdraw support, we won't have peace. We'll have what's known as a frozen conflict. That's the way almost every conflict Vladimir Putin has initiated in the last 20 years has started. So we'll have control of most of eastern and southern Ukraine. He'll be able to rebuild his combat power. He'll control Ukraine's agriculture and industry and much of its mineral wealth. He'll be able to restart this war at a time and in a manner of his choosing. That won't allow us to focus on China, as some people say we should. It will only create the risks of continuing instability on both fronts, in Europe and in Asia. The best solution here is to support Ukraine, to back the Ukrainian army to the hilt, to have a durable peace, and then we can focus more resources in the long run on the graver threat of the Chinese communists.
You know, Senator, no one wants to appease Putin, and we've seen a history of what appeasement leads to. We've seen it's not a good outcome. But then we have seen both the United States and its European allies sort of tread kind of gingerly on what type of weapons that we're willing to offer. You remember the fighter jet, they could be trained, they reside in Poland, but they can't be trained by the United States. They can send them, but it can't go over German airspace. I mean, it's unbelievable that the type of backflips we do to basically appease Putin. But would you be so bellicose to where we could eventually be in some type of global conflict to result from if we did escalate too much? Shouldn't we consider that?
No, Joe. What we should do is support Ukraine fighting its own war.
No matter what. No matter
to resist
tanks,
Russia's
fighters.
Well, so Joe, as I write in my Wall Street Journal op-ed, we can learn something from history here. For much of the second half of the 20th century, we were engaged with proxy wars with Russia around the world. We supported Afghan insurgents for 10 years after Russia invaded that country. Russia didn't just arm our enemies in places like Korea and Vietnam, but actually killed our soldiers. And in no case did that lead to a broader war. Right now, Vladimir Putin is in no position to be escalating against NATO or against the United States. He's got all he can handle in Ukraine. However, if we withdraw our support for Ukraine, if we appease this kind of naked aggression, in time, he will be able to rebuild the combat power to take not just what he has in Ukraine, but to take the rest of Ukraine, thrusting Russia deep into the heart of Europe, being able to threaten NATO countries, which we are treaty bound to support. Right. And you say that no one wants to appease Vladimir Putin, but as I argue in the op-ed, this is exactly what Joe Biden did throughout 2021. Time after time, whether it was the Nord Stream 2 pipeline or arms control treaties, or not responding to the Colonial Pipeline hack, Joe Biden tempted Vladimir Putin to do what he always wanted to do, which was go for the jugular in Ukraine. It's not a coincidence that just a few weeks after the debacle in Afghanistan, Vladimir Putin began mounting an invasion force on the border of Ukraine. Just like it's not a coincidence that just a few months after Barack Obama's Red Line debacle in Syria in 2013, Vladimir Putin invaded Ukraine for the first time.
What does this say to China about Taiwan, and what does you can weigh in on the most recent soap opera that we're seeing and how to characterize the balloon, previous balloons, why we didn't do it earlier, how it got in and we didn't hear about it just what do you make of that most recent saga?
Well, first off, if Xi Jinping, who's watching very closely what's happening in Ukraine, sees the West and the United States falter after just a year or so, he'll know there's no chance that we will come to protect Taiwan should he go for the jugular there. After all, Ukraine borders NATO. It has longstanding cultural, historic, religious, linguistic, and economic ties to Europe. Taiwan lacks those things. So that's another reason why it's important that we stand up to naked aggression in Europe so we don't see it in Asia. Unfortunately, what happened over the last week is that you had a spy balloon become a trial balloon testing President Biden's resolve and strength, and I think he failed the test. And if he's not willing to shoot down a spy balloon, which we could have easily shot down over the Aleutian Islands, but rather let it float on its merry way across the United States, I think that sends a dangerous signal to Xi Jinping.
How long do you give Taiwan? Do you have some people say it's not going to be right away. It could be 5 years, but this is all setting up sort of maybe a less, it might not have to be an armed conflict that finally brings Taiwan back into the fold of China.
Well, what you've seen in recent years in Taiwan is the Taiwanese people watching what happened in, say, Hong Kong and watching what's happened in mainland China, and really in all major political elements of Taiwanese society, the appetite for any kind of one state, two system solution has diminished. So I don't think there's going to be any chance of that kind of political compromise or outcome. That leads to Xi Jinping wanting to fulfill his longstanding ambition of invading and annexing the island back to communist China. It could happen as early as next year. It could happen in 2 years. I have no doubt that he'll want to do that by the end of this term for him, which is 2027. And the best way for us to avoid that kind of cataclysmic war is to make it clear that we will come to Taiwan's aid if China does, in fact, attack Taiwan. Joe Biden has stumbled into that position 4 times in his first 2 years in office, only to immediately reverse himself, which is kind of the worst of all possible worlds. You get the provocation towards China, but you don't get the deterrence of China. I think it's important that we be perfectly clear that we will not stand by if China tries to invade and annex Taiwan.
All right, Senator Cotton, thanks. We can talk other issues next time, debt ceiling, et cetera, the SOTU speech, but this was going to be mostly Ukraine and China, and we kept it in that lane. Thank you. Good to have you.
Thank you, Joe.